In this video, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for producing axonometric bird's eye perspective drawings. Now, many of you in this course have been representing kind of small scale pieces of your overall site master plan in kind of more traditional 1 or 2 point perspective drawings. And those vignettes are amazing for communicating what it's like to experience the site. But sometimes we want to back up and take an overall snapshot of a site master plan and represent that in 3D. Well, there's a number of challenges that come with this. One of those comes back around to a very simple question of time and how much time we have available. Because ideally, we'd go through and actually 3D model out our site design. It would put us into a SketchUp environment, or it could be done in a number of other softwares for doing 3D modeling work. And that would allow us to both take an overall view of the site, but it'll also allow us to develop other perspective drawings within the site plan. And that certainly is a good option if we kind of need that level of detail or want those additional drawings, right? And our workflow kind of comes together then. If we're producing multiple drawings, investing 15 or 20 hours in that maybe is worthwhile. I'm looking for something where we're going to invest 2 hours in producing a high quality, quick, simple hand sketch. But here we are starting off in Photoshop. And the reason being is if we begin with an overall site master plan, the ideal is that what we'll be able to do with this information is that we'll be able to go ahead and take our flat plan and actually give us a foundational base for sketching over the top of. And what I mean by that is that you can do this with a camera. Actually, it's really simple technique. This used to be how we did this, is that you'd finish up a site plan. This just happens to be an aerial photograph because the same principles apply here, is that I go ahead and position my camera and take a quick snapshot from an aerial, or from an angle that makes it look like I'm in a hot air balloon drifting 150 or 200 feet off the ground, looking down, in this case across the student farm here at Purdue's campus. And that certainly would give me a foundational base to start to work from. And so I could take that image, I could go to a light table, roll some trace over the top of it, draw my verticals up on the building corners, finish out the building drawings, draw in my hoop houses, and then finish the line work for the flat elements like the paving and the paths and the planted areas, and add some textures into these spaces, right? That's the basic idea of what we're going for here today. How can we invest 2 hours in producing an axonometric drawing of the site plan, of a broad site master plan? And so let's go ahead and get started. And so in order to start on this, let me go ahead and show you. Here's my original drawing. And what we're going to do with this original is that we're actually going to go ahead and use the free transform tool. And so the free transform tool you're probably familiar with. Most people use it to make things bigger or smaller. And sometimes you probably have noticed that something happens and everything gets stretched and pulled in the wrong direction. Well, what I just did there, if I actually go ahead and kind of pull this out, is exactly what we're up to here today, is that I am going to manipulate this site plan. In this case, I'll pull it down a little bit, in a way that gives me a view of the site that I can then use to just sketch over the top of and add vertical elements to. And so certainly I could go about it just like I've shown you here in, above. But for this site plan, I actually think really what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and just back up to open, is that I'm going to go ahead and start by rotating that. And the reason being is that I really want to showcase kind of the overall site, specifically with this baseball field complex up here. And so now that I've got this laid out in this direction, what I'm going to do with the rotated version is that I'm going to go ahead and use Control-T as the shortcut for free transform. And I'm going to go ahead and use the free transform tool. I'm going to begin by just going ahead and proportionally shrinking down my drawing a little bit. And I'll recenter. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull. And again, you have to use the control key. And so I should have mentioned that before, is that if I don't use the control key, all that happens is that I pull the image around in proportion to itself. The control key allows me to break that and actually change the proportions. So you'll see that holding the control key, I can go ahead and drag the drawing out to the side. And I'm going to do that on both sides and kind of pull the drawing off the page in a little bit. in both directions. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to hold the shift key, but I'm going to use it to go ahead and just drop the back of the image a little bit, and then pull down the front just a little bit there. And more or less, I'm just looking for something that I find appealing, something that I want to draw over the top of. I can always come back in after I'm done and shrink it back down a little bit to make it fit on the page. But you want to go ahead and aim for something that you like, that you find appealing in terms of looking at it, that it looks like it could, a good foundation for creating a drawing over the top of. And what I mean by that is I actually mean, so here's a developed one I did before that was very simple. All I did was stretch things out, right? Laid it out in this direction, so it's a little bit different than the one that I just created, and you'll see that every time you do it, it's going to be a little bit different. But one of the things I can do is that I can actually go ahead and come in and use a brush tool to go ahead, and add in my trees, so that vertical element. I'm actually going to go ahead and set these trees back down on the ground here real quick. I've gone ahead and gotten a jump start on this, but this is the technique that I use. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab that color. You'll see that I've got an effect, just a simple stroke effect, so it gives me an edge around that layer, so anywhere that I put it, I've got it, right? And so, but to get the shape, what I need to do is that I need to go ahead and look for my brush settings. And underneath brush settings, what you're going to find is I need to change the roundness to 70%, because when it's 100%, it's a circle. So 70%. And then I've also gone ahead and changed my angle to 90 degrees. And what that allows me to do is create a nice little oval. And so, working from the back of the drawing, which this is the important part, always start in the back of the drawing. Go ahead and just, right now you can see I'm setting these trees right down on top of the ground level throughout the drawing. What I'm going to do with those in a minute is that I'll go ahead and just pop them up by moving the layer up, so that I can actually, when I come back over and trace it, I can have space to go ahead and put some tree trunks in there. But for right now, it's simpler to just go ahead and start the layout by going in and just dropping in my trees. Again, back to front, making sure that trying to pay attention to kind of how they're massing, and in a few cases you may have to make some additions to your overall, just to make it look right. And so again, you got to make sure you go back to front on these, and again, sometimes you just want to make sure they kind of stack correctly. And you'll see me kind of play this out in this way. And so in this way I can go ahead and get all of my canopy trees in. Now it'd be really simple to then just go ahead and create a second tree. Go ahead and change down the size, maybe not that much, to come in and get my specimen trees. Probably would help if I actually created these on a new layer, so I'll just go ahead and do that real fast. Go ahead and copy my layer settings so I get that nice outline around them to make it really easy to see them as I drop them into space. And so what that'll allow me to do, oops, that's not a canopy tree. These are definitely, or a specialty tree. Go ahead and get all of these specialty trees dropped in all across the site. And so again, what I'm doing here for myself is that I'm giving myself the ability to see all of the vertical elements start to be expressed, at least in terms of vegetation to start with. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there, but you can see how I could go ahead and finish this out relatively fast. And so again, I'm going to use just a simple move tool, and I'm going to go ahead and pull those up just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the canopy trees, and voila, now they're all positioned just off the ground everywhere around the site. The next thing I'm going to do is actually want to go ahead and I just need the wireframe for how tall is a building as compared to these trees. And so a few years ago, a student developed this technique in our class here, and basically all it is that I'm going to go ahead and turn a couple of these layers off so you can see, and I'm going to zoom in. Right, and so when I get in here, you actually see that there's a layer, and it's just a simple line that we've created, and then we've just copied it and moved it around the four corners of the building, because this is what I mean by an axonometric drawing, is that no matter where we're at on the site, and this is what distinguishes an axonometric drawing from a typical bird's eye perspective drawing, is that no matter where we're at on the site, the vertical Z dimension is uniform, meaning that a tree that's a specialty tree is the same height down here in this part of the drawing as it would be up in the back part of the drawing. In a more traditional 2-point perspective, that's actually forced so that an object at the front is exaggerated in its height and an object at the back is diminished to try and help create depth within the drawing. And so what we're doing here is that we're just going ahead and adding in a simple wireframe. We can do this for fencing. And so there's the backstop fencing for the field. There's the shorter fencing around that field. And again, we're just creating some vertical elements to allow us to go ahead and identify a consistent height throughout the drawing. And I can go around every piece of this drawing and create those vertical elements. Some things I'm going to go ahead and leave alone. There is a playground over here. In that playground, I'm just going to go ahead, once I stop, print this off, and start sketching over the top of it by hand, I will add in those details. It's much easier to do it at that point in time. Now, you could also add cars into this space if you so wanted. And so anything that you want to add, now is the time to do it. It will make things easier on you as you go into the hand drawing process. Remember that the goal behind all of this is to develop a complete axonometric bird's eye perspective of your site master plan in under 2 hours time, right? And so this step is all about giving you a very strong foundation to come back over the top and produce using some of the same techniques. So stippling, hatching, textures, right? All of those elements are still in play when we're doing this in a 3D environment, but we need the reason for dropping the trees and the buildings and the other vertical elements on here at this point is simply to make it faster and easier to accurately represent those items in a hand-drawn sketch. That's about it for today. I will tell you that actually, I can show you one more thing, and that is to show you some past examples of students who've done this before, who've developed this particular technique. And one of the ways that students have taken this is that a handful of students, and I'm bringing one up in particular, have actually taken their drawings all the way out and completed them in Photoshop itself rather than kicking this out to a drawing. And so this is an example that Michaela did a few years ago, and I'll zoom in here, and you can go ahead and see that she has done everything, including the trees and putting shadows in with the trees, the buildings. Everything is done using this same technique. Now, she would be the first one to tell you that this was 8 to 10 hours of time invested in creating this. I still believe that the hand-drawn version that is a 2-hour technique is the best use of this approach. I really do like what was produced here in front of you, but there's a part of me that starts to look at the trade-off. Would it have been more efficient to actually develop this in SketchUp and Lumion? And the answer is probably yes, once you're getting up to that 8 to 10 hour mark. It's probably still more time to model and render using those softwares, but if you're going to invest this kind of time, if you're going to invest upwards of 10 hours, you want the ability to get more than one perspective view, and that's what a 3D model would give you. That's all I've got for this activity. I will go ahead and let you take it from there.